In today's video, we're going to take a look at how we can get our API that's currently using Azure OpenAI to talk to our data to also do some stuff. In the GPT world, this is called function calling. In Microsoft world, it looks like it's going to be called chat tools. If I had to take a look at the SDK that we've got available. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Okay, so before we get going into the code, let's take a quick look at how a traditional chat response would work as compared to a chat tool response. Now, first of all, we would typically send a message, which our API would then basically consume and mutate into something that our LLM would expect. And that basically just says, right, well, go and format it into a response type that OpenAI expects. Then we'll obviously send that to the LLM, and that would do its thing. It would process the data, generate some sort of natural language response, and send it back to the API. We would convert that back into something that our client could potentially expect, and then the client would consume. Now, this applies for both streaming and normal, sort of just get the whole response together. But when it comes to using chat tools, there's quite a lot that happens at the API layer. So if we were to take a look at what this would look like then, first of all, we'd send the message, it'll mutate it, it'll send it to the LLM. The LLM would basically consume that, but then it would identify that, hang on, I've got a set of tools that I'm allowed to call. And this message or this response from the user, or request from the user, looks like it has something to do with this function. From there on out, it would basically send it back to the API and say, listen, all right, well, the LLM doesn't really do anything. It just says, listen, here's something that looks like you need to call this function, whatever you call that function in your code. You'd basically say, all right, well, here is a tool message that we got, and here's the tool ID. That tool ID becomes important in a second, and you would then go and execute the code. So in a traditional LLM sort of function call type application, you would have your LLM code, and then you would have a series of functions that you would call, API calls, whatever the case might be. Right? So then you would actually do that. Then you would add it to the history of the conversation again, but you would include the tool ID because that's very important for the LLM not to get confused, to know which response relates to which tool message. And then that whole cycle starts again. You would process the data, it would send it back to the API, and then finally your client would consume. So there's quite a lot that happens in the middle. So I think it's important to understand where this works, because it's not magic. It just says, from an LLM perspective, it just says, all right, well, it looks like it's something that you need to go and execute. So go and execute this and give me back the result. Then I can produce a response. And what we want to add in chat completion options is a set of tools. Right now, we're just going to use one to illustrate what it looks like today. And I've prepped some code for us, so you don't have to watch me typing, but we'll walk through it nice and slowly. So first of all, we've got tools, right? That's a property on the object itself. And then we've got a new chat completion function definition, right? Some basics we'll need is a name and a description. And then we've got the parameters. Now, parameters is quite nice. It is a it accepts any sort of binary object, so it doesn't have to be a typed class or something specific that we have to go and set up. So, and that is going to be effectively, if you think about it, the parameters that a post request or a get request or something along these lines would need to fulfill. So it's all it is the parameters of the function that you're going to call. Now we're just going to serialize that object because we do want to bring it back in camel case, so it's a little bit easier for us to use. Now in this object, there are a few things that we need to know, right? So we've got the type, which is an object, so obviously that makes sense because we're going to return a JSON object with a series of properties. And then if you look at our options over here, location and unit, those are specific to the function I'm calling. That can be class, that can be surname, that can be age, anything that you want. But you're defining what these properties look like. So first of all, I've got type, which is string in our case. Unit might be a number or an integer or something along those lines. And the description, right? Now, as I said in the beginning, This is just the definition of what the tool or the LLM needs to know of what it is capable of. Later on, it's going to bring back a message to say, right, well, based on all of these tools that you've given me, what the user is asking you, I think you should call this one, right? And that we need to handle in our typical sort of place where we start handling our responses. So if there's any questions around that, drop them in the comments. We can go through them together. So I just prepped a little bit of code for us as well here, so once again, just to save you guys some time. What we would typically do here is, first of all, we need to go and get the response choice. Now, typically when we work with non-chat tool type LLM apps, we omit this piece, right? Because we just go straight to the message. But here, we need to go and actually go and look at what that response choice's finish reason is. Now, we've got an enum for our finish reasons, and we can just say tool calls. That means that the response that came back, it says, I'm finished with what I needed to say this round, but the reason I'm not giving you anything more is because it's time to go and execute some code on your side. Okay? So, we go and add a message, a assistant message to this particular, based on this particular message, right? So we need to get a response, our initial response in our chat history. Then for every item in the tool calls, right? So we'll put a breakpoint on this one so we can take a look at what that looks like in a second. But for every item of the tool calls, you're going to cast the response as a chat completion function tool call. Now the reason for that is the base tool call that it gets, which is, you'll see here that it's just a .tool calls. It does not have a name property, right? So we have to go and cast it as a chat completions function tool call. All right, we're going to say then if the function name is this. Now, realistically, you would go and build out some, set strings in the class or build your own enum, whatever the case might be. However you choose to use that, obviously using strings like this is not a good idea. Then we're going to say, all right, well, if this is what we want to do, then do something. Now, realistically, sorry, let's take that out of the way. You would now go and call some client, some API somewhere, do some code, execute something, do something. But for the sake of the demo, we're just going to return this particular, it's 31 degrees and sunny, right? So go away, go and do some stuff. And then what we finally need to do is add that tool response over here. But you'll notice one thing. In our chat tool message, I'm adding an item.id. So this is in my response. If I have to go here, so tool call in tool calls, right? Then I'm going to just go and replace that everywhere. And that's basically just to illustrate what exactly we need to do over here. So that's basically what it would look like, right? Now, this can grow quite extensively, right? So, you think obviously have some sort of class or something that allows you to go and break out and decide which function to call. I would urge you to not put all of that code in one class, otherwise this thing's going to be massive. But effectively, if we had to look back at our diagram, we would have a do a function call, and now so we've added the chat history, so that's the assistant message. We've now done the work into the function call, and now we get to add that to the chat history again with the tool ID, and it basically sends it back to the LLM to say, listen, now that you've done everything, here's the information that you were looking for based on the tool call, go away and produce another response, right? Then we go and add that, and then it says another basically get a chat completions object from there, and then we basically return the result from that. Now, the gotcha that we need to consider here as well, in the API endpoint, you'll notice that I still have a normal response content outside of the finish reason to go and call the tool calls, right? Now, the reason we have that is the question that the user asked might not produce a tool call, so we need to handle both. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start up the debugger for us, and we will take a quick run at this, see what it looks like, and then we can inspect these messages quickly. Alright, so I'm just using Thunder Client to send this request quickly. You'll see I'm sending it to the tool endpoint, and we're going to wait for it to hit this finish reason breakpoint, and then we're going to take a look at what actually is happening internally. Right, so we've hit our breakpoint. It took a few seconds for it to run. We'll notice here, first of all, that if we had to look at our response choice, our finish reason is stop. Okay, so we'll step over this and see what it's saying. So it's going to say here, sure, could you please get the location and the weather. Now, why is it asking us that? Now, it's noticed that, listen, I've got this chat tool called Get Current Weather, but it requires both both the location and the unit. And if you look at the question that we've asked, what is the weather, it doesn't quite know. So I think what we'll need to do is rephrase this question. So what is the question, or what is the weather in Sydney? One of the other things we can do in this particular scenario is actually just take out the required property for units. So then it would default to whatever it can sort of come up with. I think it should, based on our method, say it is Celsius. So yeah, let's take a look. I'm going to stop this and we will jump back in after I've changed the question. So let's just say here, what is the weather in Sydney? All right, I'll see you guys in 2 seconds again. Okay, so we're back and we'll see here that the finish reason is a tool call. Okay, now what it's going to go back to and do is say, all right, well, this function is just going to return 31 degrees Celsius and sunny. And if I'm not mistaken, what it's going to do is actually going to take the context of this message and say, all right, well, because the function that we've called, so the API call or whatever, returns Celsius, it's going to see that as part of a language response, and it's going to assume that that is the unit because we've got Celsius and Fahrenheit as the potential options within our enum. So if I just step through this, I will take a look at what this looks like. So the first thing, if you remember our diagram, the first thing we want to do is add the current message, which is got null content, but it's an assistant message, so we need to add that into our sort of chat history. And then we'll say for each tool call in the message to our tool calls, and if we expand on this guy, it's going to say get weather, and there is the tool call ID. We basically have to go and do a bit of a loop to say, all right, well, hang on, what is going on and what message should you call? Let me just quickly sort that out. So great, it's going to say the function call. I'm going to cast that to a chat completion function call, and it's going to say, all right, well, the name is get weather, great, and then it's going to jump into our response where we would typically go and do our HTTP call, whatever the case might be. That's going to step through. It's going to add the response, and then what we're going to do is send another chat completion async, right? So we're going to send that to our LLM again with our new options, and you'll notice here that we are adding the tool call options to our message. Right, I'm going to let that step through and I will show you guys what it looks like when we're done. Alright, so we can see here our response is finally done. So the weather in Sydney is currently 31 degrees Celsius and sunny. Now what's interesting to see here is, and just a sort of note that it's actually taking this response and not only copying it directly, but it's putting the Celsius in caps there. So it's actually computing based on the questions that it asked us initially. So that's pretty much it, guys. So to summarize, when we have chat tools or function calls in our code or our LLM based applications, the tool call itself does not do anything. We still have to handle that in our code, and the LLM basically says, all right, well, here's a list of things or it's a collection of tools that you can use as an application, and it's basically using it as a routing mechanism to help us get to the methods we want to. I think it's really cool. I think it's really where we start unlocking the power of this functionality or the power of this technology, because even though chatting to your data is really cool, if you can chat to your data and do something else, that becomes quite powerful. in a HR type application or a sales type application and stuff like that. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this. Take a look at the playlist of all the videos in this series if you want to have a zero to hero type walkthrough on Azure OpenAI and .NET. I really appreciate the support. If you can hit the like and subscribe buttons, that would be great, and I hope to see you in the next video.